The night I saw my boss somewhere I never expected to see him, I realized I did not know him at all. Ethan Parker had always believed that Michael Anderson was exactly what everyone in the office described. A serious CEO who lived for deadlines, meetings, and impossible standards. For the past 6 months, Ethan had worked hard to prove himself at the New York media company where Michael was known as the person who could remember every detail of a project but rarely shared anything about his personal life. At work, Michael was calm, professional, and almost impossible to read. He arrived early, left late, and always seemed to carry the weight of the entire company on his shoulders. Most employees respected him, but very few people truly knew him. Ethan was one of those people who never expected to see anything beyond the office walls. That changed on a quiet Saturday night. Ethan had met a few friends after a long week and decided to visit a popular gay club in the city. He was not expecting anything unusual. He simply wanted a relaxing evening away from spreadsheets, presentations, and the pressure of proving himself at work. Then he saw someone standing near the entrance who made him stop. It was Michael. For a moment, Ethan wondered if he was mistaken. The man in front of him looked different from the person he saw every Monday morning. He was not standing in a conference room discussing company goals. He was not giving instructions or reviewing reports. He looked relaxed, comfortable, and more like himself than Ethan had ever seen. Ethan did not know what surprised him more. Seeing his boss there or realizing that he had never imagined Michael having a life outside of work. Their eyes briefly met, and both of them recognized each other. The moment was quiet, but it changed the way Ethan looked at everything. Michael gave a small polite smile before returning to his evening, and Ethan decided not to interrupt. He understood that everyone deserved a private life, including the person who signed his paycheck. Still, the image stayed in his mind long after he returned home. The next Monday morning, Ethan walked into the office expecting things to feel different. Michael entered the meeting room wearing his usual suit, carrying his usual calm expression, and speaking with the same professional confidence everyone knew. It was almost as if Saturday night had never happened. But Ethan knew something had changed. He had seen a side of Michael that nobody at the office seemed to know existed. Behind the title, the authority, and the reputation was a person with a life, feelings, and a story of his own. Ethan found himself wondering what else he had misunderstood about the man he thought he already knew. That single unexpected moment had opened a door to a completely different perspective, and Ethan had no idea that seeing his boss outside of work would become the beginning of a journey that would change both of their lives forever. The following days felt strangely different for Ethan Parker. Nothing at the office had changed, yet everything felt slightly unfamiliar. Michael Anderson still walked into meetings with the same confident expression, still reviewed every presentation carefully, and still spoke with the same calm authority that made everyone pay attention. But Ethan now knew there was another side of him that existed beyond the glass walls of the company building. That knowledge created a quiet distance between them, not because Ethan judged Michael, but because he did not know what to say. Every time they crossed paths in the hallway, Ethan wondered if Michael remembered that night too. On Tuesday morning, Ethan was reviewing a project report when Michael stopped by his desk. "The numbers in the second section look much better than last week," Michael said. "Good work." Ethan looked up and smiled. "Thank you. I appreciate that." It was a normal conversation, but Ethan noticed something he had never noticed before. Michael looked tired. Not in a way that affected his work, but in a way that reminded Ethan that even successful people carried things others could not see. Before, Ethan had only seen the position, the CEO, the person making decisions, the person everyone expected to have all the answers. Now he saw the person behind the title. Later that afternoon, Ethan overheard a few coworkers discussing Michael. They talked about how impressive he was, how dedicated he seemed, and how little anyone knew about his personal life. Their words stayed with Ethan because he understood that they were all seeing only one version of him. That evening, Ethan stayed late to finish his work. As he packed his bag, he noticed Michael still working in his office. The lights were on, and the usually busy floor was almost empty. For a moment, Ethan considered saying goodbye, but he stopped himself. He did not want to make the situation uncomfortable. The next morning, Ethan received an unexpected message from Michael asking if he could join a small project discussion after lunch. It was completely professional, but Ethan felt nervous anyway. When they sat together in the conference room, Michael noticed that Ethan seemed quieter than usual. "Is everything okay?" Michael asked. Ethan hesitated before answering. "Yes, I just realized there is probably a lot people do not know about you." Michael looked surprised for a moment. Then he gave a small thoughtful smile. "That is true for most people." The simple answer stayed with Ethan. It reminded him that everyone carried stories they did not share with the world. Michael was not just a boss, and Ethan was not just an employee trying to prove himself. They were two people who had only seen small pieces of each other's lives. As the conversation continued, Ethan began to feel that the secret he had discovered was not something that separated them. Instead, it created a strange understanding between them. He had expected the situation to become uncomfortable, but instead it made him more curious about who Michael really was. For the first time, Ethan wondered if the person behind the professional image was someone he wanted to understand. Not because he was his boss, but because he was simply another person with a story waiting to be known. By the middle of the week, Ethan Parker realized that the hardest part was not knowing Michael Anderson's secret. The hardest part was understanding how little he had actually known about the person he saw every day. The office continued moving at its usual pace.
Phones rang, meetings
filled the calendar, and employees rushed between departments with their usual responsibilities. Yet Ethan found himself paying attention to small details he had ignored before. He noticed how Michael always thanked the support staff after meetings. He noticed how he stayed late to review work from younger employees who needed guidance. He noticed how carefully he listened whenever someone brought a problem to him. Before that weekend, Ethan had only seen a demanding leader. Now he was beginning to see someone who carried a lot of responsibility while quietly caring about the people around him. One afternoon, Ethan and Michael worked together on a major presentation for an upcoming client meeting. The project required several hours of preparation, and for the first time, they had a chance to talk beyond simple workplace conversations. "You are different from what I expected," Ethan said while organizing documents on the conference table. Michael looked over with a curious expression. "Different in a good way or a bad way?" Ethan smiled slightly. "In a good way. I think I only knew the professional version of you." Michael paused for a moment. Then he looked toward the office window, watching the busy streets below. "Most people only know the version of us that we choose to show them." His answer made Ethan think. He realized that he also did the same thing. At work, he wanted everyone to see him as confident and capable, even when he was unsure of himself. Maybe Michael was not so different after all. Later that week, Ethan accidentally found himself sitting near Michael during a company event. It was a casual gathering where employees could relax outside the usual office environment. Ethan noticed that Michael seemed more comfortable when he was not surrounded by formal meetings and expectations. He laughed more easily, listened more openly, and seemed less like a distant executive. That moment reminded Ethan of what he had seen before. The person he noticed outside the office was not a completely different person. It was simply a part of Michael that rarely appeared at work. As the evening continued, Ethan realized something important. The discovery that first surprised him had not changed Michael. It had changed Ethan's understanding of him. He no longer wondered why Michael had a private life separate from his professional image. Instead, he respected that everyone deserved a space where they could simply be themselves. Before leaving the event, Michael stopped beside Ethan and thanked him for helping with the presentation. "You have been doing great work," Michael said. "I hope you know that your efforts are noticed." Ethan appreciated the words more than he expected. For someone who seemed impossible to read, Michael had a way of making people feel valued. Walking home that night, Ethan thought about how quickly assumptions could disappear when people took the time to understand each other. The man he once saw only as his boss was slowly becoming someone he wanted to know as a person. And Ethan had a feeling that the unexpected moment that started everything was only the beginning of a much bigger story. The week after the company event, Ethan Parker noticed that his relationship with Michael Anderson had entered a strange new stage. Nothing official had changed. Michael was still his boss, Ethan was still an employee, and their conversations at work remained professional. Yet there was now a quiet understanding between them that had not existed before. They both knew they had seen a different side of each other, and that small moment of honesty had created a connection built on trust. Ethan found himself becoming more comfortable around Michael. He no longer felt nervous whenever they crossed paths in the hallway. Instead of seeing the CEO of the company, he saw the person who always asked how his team was doing, the person who remembered small details about employees, and the person who often carried responsibilities without sharing how heavy they could feel. One Friday afternoon, Ethan stayed late to finish a project before the weekend. Most of the office had already emptied when Michael walked by and noticed the lights still on. "You are still here?" Michael asked. Ethan looked up from his computer and smiled. "Trying to finish everything before Monday." Michael nodded, then placed a folder on the desk. "Do not forget that working hard does not mean you have to carry everything alone." The simple comment stayed with Ethan. It was something he never expected from the person he once considered impossible to understand. Later that evening, Michael invited Ethan to join a small team dinner after the project was completed. It was not unusual for coworkers to celebrate achievements, but Ethan noticed that Michael seemed more relaxed than usual. Away from the pressure of the office, he listened more, laughed more, and allowed himself to be part of the group instead of standing apart as the person in charge. Ethan began to understand that Michael had spent years building a professional image because that was what his role required. But behind that image was someone who also wanted normal conversations, genuine friendships, and moments where he did not have to be responsible for every decision. During the dinner, one of the employees thanked Michael for always supporting the team. Michael simply smiled and said, "A company is not built by one person. It is built by everyone who gives their best." Ethan noticed how sincere he sounded. There was no attempt to impress anyone. It was simply who he was. On the way home, Ethan thought about the assumptions he had made when he first saw Michael outside the office. He had believed he discovered something surprising about his boss, but the truth was that he had discovered something about himself. He had been too focused on titles and appearances to notice the person behind them. The experience taught him that people were always more complicated than the roles they played. As the city lights reflected across the streets of New York, Ethan felt grateful for the unexpected moment that changed his perspective. He still did not know everything about Michael, but for the first time, he wanted to understand the person behind the title. And he knew that the journey of discovering that person was only beginning. The conversation Ethan Parker had been avoiding finally happened on a quiet Thursday evening. After a long day at the office, Ethan found himself alone with Michael Anderson in the conference room, reviewing the final details of an important project. The city lights outside the windows reflected across the glass, creating a calm atmosphere that felt completely different from the usual pressure of work. Ethan noticed that Michael seemed unusually thoughtful. He was looking through the documents, but his attention appeared to be somewhere else. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said carefully. Michael looked up and nodded. "Of course." Ethan paused, choosing his words. "Do you ever feel like people only see the version of you that they expect to see?" For a moment, Michael was quiet. Then he smiled slightly. "More often than you might think." That answer surprised Ethan because it sounded less like a response from a CEO and more like a response from someone who had been carrying the same questions for years. Michael leaned back in his chair and looked toward the window. He explained that being a leader often meant people focused on his decisions, his responsibilities, and his reputation. They rarely asked how he felt or what life was like outside the office. Ethan listened carefully because he understood that feeling more than he expected. Even though he was not in Michael's position, he also knew what it was like to hide uncertainty behind a professional image. "I think everyone has a side of themselves that they do not show at work," Ethan said. Michael nodded. "That is probably true." The conversation remained respectful and honest. There was no pressure, no judgment, and no need for either of them to explain more than they were comfortable sharing. Ethan realized that the most important thing was not the place where he had seen Michael that night. It was the trust that came from understanding that people had lives beyond the roles they played. Over the next few weeks, their conversations became more natural. They still maintained professional boundaries, but there was a stronger sense of mutual respect between them. Ethan found himself appreciating Michael's honesty, while Michael seemed to value having someone who saw him as a person rather than just a position. One afternoon, after completing another successful project, Michael thanked Ethan for his dedication. "You have grown a lot since you started here," Michael said. "You notice things other people miss." Ethan smiled. "I think I learned that everyone has more going on than we realize." Michael looked at him and nodded. "That is a lesson worth remembering." Walking home that evening, Ethan thought about how different everything felt compared to the night he first saw Michael outside the office. What began as surprise had become understanding. What began as curiosity had become respect. Ethan still had many things to learn about Michael, but he no longer wanted to understand him because he was his boss. He wanted to understand him because, behind every title and every expectation, there was a real person with a story that mattered. The weeks that followed brought a quiet change that Ethan Parker never expected. The office looked exactly the same every morning, with the same busy hallways, the same meetings, and the same deadlines filling everyone's schedules. But Ethan's perspective had completely changed. He no longer saw Michael Anderson as a distant executive who existed only behind a desk and a company title. He saw someone who carried responsibilities, protected his team, and still tried to find moments where he could simply be himself. One afternoon, Ethan was asked to help prepare materials for a major company presentation. The project required several late hours, and he found himself working closely with Michael again. Instead of feeling nervous, Ethan noticed how easy their conversations had become. They discussed ideas, shared opinions, and even laughed about small mistakes that happened during the preparation. It felt natural, but Ethan also understood the importance of keeping their relationship professional. Respect had always been the foundation of their connection. During one of their breaks, Michael looked through the presentation notes and said, "You have a good instinct for understanding people." Ethan smiled. "I think I learned that from watching you." Michael looked surprised. "Me?" Ethan nodded. "Yes, you always notice when someone needs support, even when nobody says anything." For a moment, Michael did not respond. Then he gave a thoughtful smile. "I do not think many people notice that." Ethan understood why. Most people saw the decisions Michael made, but they rarely saw the small moments behind those decisions. They did not see him staying late to help a struggling employee. They did not see him checking on a team member after a difficult week. They did not see the person who cared quietly without needing recognition. That realization made Ethan appreciate Michael even more. Later that month, the company held a small celebration after completing a successful project. Ethan watched Michael interact with everyone around him. He was still the respected CEO, but he was also someone who listened, smiled, and shared genuine conversations with the people around him. The image was completely different from the one Ethan had created in his mind months earlier. After the event ended, Ethan and Michael walked toward the building entrance together. The evening air was cool, and the city was beginning to slow down. "I think people spend a lot of time trying to understand what others are hiding," Michael said quietly. "Sometimes they forget to understand what people are carrying." Ethan thought about those words. They explained so much about what had happened between them. At first, he thought he had discovered something unexpected about Michael. But the truth was that he had discovered the importance of looking deeper before creating conclusions. "I am glad I got the chance to know the person behind the title," Ethan said. Michael smiled. "I am glad someone took the time to see that person." As they said goodbye and went their separate ways, Ethan realized that the unexpected moment that started everything had given him something he never expected. A new understanding of connection, trust, and the stories people keep hidden beneath the surface. After everything that had happened, Ethan Parker noticed that his thoughts about Michael Anderson had changed in a way he never expected. The person who once seemed impossible to understand had slowly become someone Ethan respected and trusted. However, Ethan also knew that understanding someone did not happen overnight. People were not defined by one moment, one conversation, or one secret. They were shaped by years of experiences, choices, and challenges that others rarely saw. One morning, Ethan arrived at the office earlier than usual and found Michael already there. The city outside was still quiet, and the usually crowded workplace felt peaceful. Michael was standing near the window with a cup of coffee, looking over the streets below. "You are here early," Michael said with a small smile. Ethan laughed. "I could say the same thing about you." Their conversation was simple, but Ethan noticed something different. Michael seemed more relaxed than before. Maybe it was because he no longer felt the need to keep every part of himself hidden. Over time, a small but meaningful friendship had developed between them. They still respected their professional roles, but they had also built a level of understanding that was rare in a workplace. Later that week, Ethan faced a difficult situation with a project deadline. He had spent several days trying to solve a problem and started doubting his own abilities. Michael noticed the change in his attitude and asked him to talk. Instead of giving a simple instruction like a typical manager, Michael listened first. "You do not have to know every answer immediately," Michael said. "Growth comes from learning how to handle moments when things do not go perfectly." Ethan appreciated the advice because it felt personal rather than professional. It reminded him that Michael had probably faced many similar moments throughout his own career. The conversation showed Ethan another side of Michael, not as a leader, but as someone who understood uncertainty and pressure. A few days later, Ethan helped Michael prepare for an important presentation. While reviewing the final details, they talked about how different life looked from the outside compared to how it actually felt. "People often think success means everything becomes easier," Michael said. "But sometimes more responsibility simply means more things to carry." Ethan nodded because he finally understood. The person everyone admired was also someone who needed moments of honesty and connection. That evening, Ethan walked home through the busy streets of New York and thought about the unexpected journey that had brought them to this point. He had once believed he discovered something unusual about Michael. Instead, he discovered that every person had layers that could not be seen at first glance. The experience changed the way Ethan approached everyone around him. He became more patient, more curious, and less willing to make assumptions. Michael had not only changed the way Ethan viewed him, he had changed the way Ethan viewed people in general. And somewhere between professional conversations and personal understanding, Ethan realized that the connection they had built was becoming something truly meaningful. As the months passed, Ethan Parker realized that the most unexpected moments in life were often the ones that revealed the most important truths. The person he once viewed only through a professional title had become someone whose thoughts, experiences, and kindness he genuinely valued. Yet Ethan also understood that their connection required patience and respect. The difference in their positions at work meant they had to be thoughtful about every step they took. Their trust was built not through dramatic moments, but through countless small conversations and shared experiences that showed who they truly were. One afternoon, after completing a major company project, Ethan and Michael Anderson stayed behind in the office to review the final results. The building was quiet, and the usual energy of the workday had faded. Michael looked through the completed presentation and smiled. "You have come a long way since your first week here," he said. Ethan laughed softly. "I think I have learned more than just how to do my job." Michael looked curious. "What do you mean?" Ethan thought for a moment before answering. "I learned that people are rarely what they seem at first. Sometimes we only notice the parts of someone that are easiest to see." Michael nodded because he understood exactly what Ethan meant. Over time, both of them had learned something valuable from each other. Ethan had learned to look beyond appearances and assumptions. Michael had learned that allowing someone to see a more personal side of him did not make him weaker, created trust. A few weeks later, the company organized a community event where employees could volunteer together. Ethan and Michael both attended, working alongside their coworkers in a relaxed environment outside the usual office setting. Ethan noticed how naturally Michael connected with everyone. He was not focused on his position or reputation. He was simply present, listening to conversations and helping wherever he could. Watching him, Ethan remembered the first time he saw Michael outside the office. Back then, he had been surprised because the image did not match his expectations. Now he understood that there was never a contradiction. Michael was the same person all along. He was a leader, a coworker, and someone with his own hopes and challenges. Later that evening, while they were walking back from the event, Michael thanked Ethan for being someone who had taken the time to understand him. "Most people see what they expect to see," Michael said. "It is rare when someone takes a moment to look deeper." Ethan smiled. "I think everyone deserves that chance." Those words stayed with Michael. The simple truth behind them was something they both needed to remember. Nobody wanted to be defined by assumptions. Everyone wanted to be understood as a complete person. As Ethan continued walking through the city that night, he realized how much his perspective had changed. A single unexpected encounter had challenged everything he thought he knew. What started as a moment of surprise had become a lesson about empathy, honesty, and connection. And Ethan knew that whatever happened next, the understanding they had built would always remain one of the most meaningful experiences of his life. 1 year later, Ethan Parker often thought about how different his life looked compared to the person he was before that unexpected night. The city of New York was still busy, the office was still filled with deadlines, and Michael Anderson was still the respected CEO everyone knew. But Ethan no longer saw him as only a position or a reputation. He saw a person who had taught him one of the most important lessons he had ever learned. Everyone has a story that deserves to be understood. Looking back, Ethan remembered how certain he had been when he first made assumptions. He believed he understood what he saw, but he only understood a small part of the truth. The more he learned about Michael, the more he realized how easy it was to mistake privacy for distance and confidence for a lack of emotion. Michael had always been someone who cared deeply about the people around him. He simply expressed it in quiet ways that many people overlooked. On a calm Friday evening, Ethan and Michael sat together at a small cafe near the office after finishing a long week. It had become a simple tradition for them to talk outside the pressure of meetings and responsibilities. They discussed work, personal goals, and the experiences that had shaped who they were. "Do you ever think about how different things would be if we had never met that night?" Ethan asked. Michael smiled while looking at the city streets outside. "Sometimes. But I think some moments happen when we need them most." Ethan nodded. He understood what Michael meant. That unexpected encounter had not changed Michael into someone different. It had changed the way Ethan saw him. It had also changed the way Ethan saw everyone else. He became more patient with people. He listened more carefully. He stopped creating stories about others before knowing the truth behind them. Months earlier, he had been focused on discovering something surprising about Michael. In the end, the greatest discovery was learning how much depth existed in every person around him. Before they left the cafe, Michael thanked Ethan for being someone who had looked beyond appearances. "You reminded me that being understood matters," Michael said. Ethan smiled. "I think everyone deserves that." Walking through the familiar streets afterward, Ethan felt grateful for the journey that had brought him here. A single moment of surprise had opened the door to a friendship built on honesty, respect, and trust. The person he once saw only as his boss had become someone whose perspective changed the way he viewed the world. Ethan knew that life would continue bringing unexpected moments, but now he welcomed them with a different mindset. Instead of searching for reasons to judge, he searched for reasons to understand. And that simple change became the greatest lesson he carried forward. Sometimes the people who surprise us the most are the ones who help us discover a better version of ourselves.